face over. Good morning and welcome. Top of the morning to you. Back home, back in my office. And this is the SitRep for today, which is the 16th of May, 2022. Getting there. Welcome to the reports from the age of crisis, which is certainly what we're in, the age of crisis. So the point of these little chats in the morning or whenever I put them out is to go through news articles that I've seen that pique my interest from the perspective of prepping and how we can better prepare ourselves for the future that's coming. As I mentioned there, the age of crisis is what we may well be in right now. So that's a good or a bad thing. It's just where we're at as a society. So let's work together and try and make ourselves more prepared, better off, so that we can help ourselves, not be a burden on the systems, on the powers that be, and maybe even be an asset, help others out. So that's the point of what I'm trying to do here by going through these things. Not to freak you out, but if you get freaked out, that's also understandable. All right, let's jump into it this morning. What do we have? We've got a lot of civil unrest and mass shootings happening in the US right now. 4, in fact. Just before I jumped on, one popped up in California. So Laguna City, I think, or Laguna, one of those two, in California at a church. There has been another shooting. That's about all the information we have. I have seen unconfirmed reports that there's 1 dead and 4 injured, and that the shooter has been apprehended. So that's out in the news. What else we got? We got the mass shooting event in Buffalo, New York State. We have a multiple mass shooting event in Chicago, along with rioting and mob-like activity. And we also have multiple shooting events in Milwaukee from yesterday. So 4 events that I'm tracking here that have happened in the US. So again, I just want to reiterate to people that one of the best things we can do to keep ourselves safe in any situation is to be situationally aware, to be aware of what's happening around us, to be on the lookout for threats, no matter where we are out in a public space. We should be eyes open, head on a swivel. So looking around for potential threats for people that are acting in an odd way, and especially for people that are dressed in camouflage gear, which is what happened. I've reviewed a bit of the footage now from the Buffalo shooting, not from any of the others, because there is no footage that is at least being released of the others that I can see yet. In fact, there's a lot of non-reporting on those other ones. But from the Buffalo shooting, at least, it was a armed assailant who was wearing camouflage gear. It looks like it was pretty much a copycat of the Christchurch shooting. And that is one that I have been through, picked over quite substantially, the Christchurch shooting, even down to the manifesto that was released beforehand, shows that the person, like it just seems like an absolute copycat shooting or event that's happened there. Even to the point where they've actually copied and pasted parts of the manifesto from the Christchurch shooter. So, yeah, that's something that does happen within the active shooter world, that you do see copycat events or similar events pop out. This one looks like it was trying to copycat almost exactly. There was the white writing, especially white nationalist, racist sort of writing on the weapons. There was the manifesto, which was copied and pasted. There was the person who was, focusing on a particular subset of population based on skin color. And the person was also dressed in camouflage gear. So yeah, very, very similar sort of stuff happening there between those two shootings. But, these are the sort of things we can look for. And once we sort of arm ourselves with the information about how these things work, who perpetrates them, what sort of activities they do, how they do them, then we can better prepare ourselves for the future. So that's something I always recommend to people. We should be more vigilant, more situationally aware, just as a matter of course, as human beings. I think as human beings in our society, we just walk around our space oblivious to what's going on. So that's something that I recommend that you try and do. Practice. Situational awareness is not something that you get taught and you're like, yeah, I get it. It's a habit. It's something you practice and you get good at. Also concerning for me, because I happen to walk around every now and then in camouflage gear out in the public space when I'm going hunting. Go and grab a coffee before I go hunting or something, wearing my cams. So yeah, not a good trend. But that's something I've got to be thoughtful of, I guess. All right, what else do we have? So if I just track this actually, where are we? So I'll just jump on a website here and have a look at this. So front page news, bam, 1, 2 stories about the Buffalo shooting. As of yet, nothing's actually come out on any of the major sites that I've seen. They're a little bit slow on this shooting that's happened in California. In fact, if I let's go to the United States now. Let's see what's happening in the United States. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm up to 5 stories. There's six stories on the Buffalo shooting. The only thing about the Milwaukee shooting that I can see is that the Bucks, that happened after an NBA game where the Milwaukee Bucks played, is a sports story here that says Bucks cancel Game 7 watch party after the shooting. So they reference that there was a shooting there, but they don't actually go into what the shooting was. And as I said, nothing. There's an 8th story now on the Buffalo one. Still nothing on the shootings that have happened in Chicago. And I watched footage of what's happening in Chicago. It is horrific. Like mobs of people looting, attacking each other, huge fights breaking out, police really struggling there to enforce law and order of any sort, and multiple shootings there. Not a story on it. That to me, like I'm not getting into the whole where obviously news is orientated and why it's probably focused on this one story, but I think the role of a news agency should be to present information to people so they can better arm themselves or understand the world better. And in this sort of case, where you've got somebody who goes around, shooting people or gangs or whatever it is, it's a life and death sort of thing. The more information we can actually take in on these situations, the better we can understand them, the better we can protect ourselves as individuals. So I find it irresponsible that 3 of these stories are not being reported, and there are more deaths in the Chicago one than the Buffalo one. So to me, it's just from a pure standpoint of a scale of importance, we should be getting more information on what's happening in Chicago than we should in Buffalo. The Buffalo one, very important, very evil what happened there. I do not agree with it in any way, shape or form. But what I'm saying is that one is done and dusted. We can look at that. We can have stories on that. We don't need 8 stories on it to pull it apart from every single angle. What we need is some information coming out about what's happening in Chicago right now, still occurring in Chicago right now. What happened in Milwaukee and why did it happen? What were the things around it? What is happening right now in Los Angeles with this shooter? So yeah, that's my little rant for today. I just find it irresponsible, to be honest, and frustrating to me for somebody who I actively go out and look for this sort of information. It's part of my job. It's part of my role. I do teach courses, and I will be teaching one today. And it's exactly about this. Part of that course is a segment on active shooter survival. So I need to know this sort of stuff. I need to know it in higher resolution. I want to know if there's any changes that are happening to trends that we've seen in the past. I know I can see this Buffalo one now. I'm like, cool. All right. No change to anything that's happened in the past there. There was nothing out of the ordinary. There was nothing that blew my mind about that one. It was a stock standard as what we know active shooter events to be post Christchurch. But these other ones that are happening, well, I need to know about that. I need to know where the information is. And there is this restriction. There is this kibosh on information that's coming out about it. So I'm frustrated about that this morning. So from that Chicago one, 20 people have been shot 400 people involved in riots, rioting brawls. So not just in riots, in brawls. 400 people in brawls. Can you imagine? I've seen some of the video footage of it, and it's like, imagine WrestleMania on steroids. It's just like people just coming in from all angles, fighting, and then coming back out. It's just like kids playing a big game, but people getting injured and killed. Multiple shots fired in multiple locations. 3 mass shooting events have been designated in Chicago. And again, nothing that I'm seeing on mainstream media. So, yeah, it's, this sort of stuff is concerning me. What else have we got? So a little bit more, on that Laguna Woods is what it's called. Laguna Woods, California. Apparently it happened in and around a religious building, possibly a church. 1 person possibly dead, 4 people possibly injured, and the attacker is apprehended. So if you get it from nowhere else, at least you heard it from me. Again, just these are sort of things we want to look out for. This is all happening within the US. Interestingly enough, these are happening in places, Buffalo, California, Buffalo, New York, California, Laguna Woods, California, that have heavily restricted their gun laws. So I know people will come out and they'll always say, well, this is what happens when you give everyone guns in America. America is not homogenized with its gun laws. Its states are sometimes quite restrictive with its gun laws. Some of the states actually resemble Australia with its gun laws. So access to these weapons is not necessarily what the problem is. And you could argue both ways on that by restricting people, you're also restricting the amount of people that can counter these sorts of events. But I mean, we can argue that left and right as well. There is definitely a thing about restriction, but there's also a thing about teaching people how to use weapons properly. So, all right, let's jump over into Europe now. What's been happening over there overnight? The big news that's come out of Europe is Finland has formally confirmed its decision to join NATO. So we knew it was all happening, but they had to formally do it. So they have formally done it now. They say, hey, we are joining NATO. We're putting the paperwork into our parliament. By all accounts, it's a done deal. The parliament will the majority has already said, yep, we've got consensus on this. It's going to happen. So it's considered certain now that they're doing it. And as soon as they did that, Sweden came out and said, yep, we're going to do it too. Just hours after they did that, in fact, they said, yep, we're going into. So that's happening. Let's wait to see what Russia's response is to that. I personally don't think there'll be a huge response, but I've been wrong in the past about how Russia responds. I don't know if they've got the capability really to do anything about this. But this changes the game a little bit. This is another shift that we're seeing within this area. Like I've said a few times, we're at the cusp in history where we're seeing a change at the moment, where we've had things kind of solidish for a little while. And whenever you're in a solid position in history, a relative solid position in history, we have the tendency of looking like, oh, well, this is the way things have always been. So we look at the lines on the map and we look at countries and we look at our atlases and things like that. And we go, yeah, well, that's Europe and that's the way it's always been. It hasn't always been like that. This was formed, the world that we know it was formed kind of officially World War II, but it was in the molten stage, I guess, at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. So what we're entering into now is another change. We're seeing things change. So we're seeing now these countries come into NATO. On top of this, we've also got news coming out that Moldova president signs the application to join the EU. So it looks like Moldova is going to jump into the EU. Again, this is another shift. This is another change that we're seeing. We'll wait to see what flows on from that. But this is obviously right up against where all the stuff is happening in Ukraine right now. So I don't know what the fallout from that will be, but it just is interesting. We're seeing the shift of alliances. We're seeing EU expand, but we're also seeing fracture within the EU. So we might even see some EU dropouts come out. We're seeing NATO expand, but will that be, how long will that last? What will that take? Will that actually envelop all of Europe? And then will they start to move over to our part of the world as China starts to raise its head again? Who knows what's going to happen here? But as I said, these are all trends that we should keep our eye on and just think about this long-term effects. Okay, so what's going to happen here, and how best do we sort of prepare ourselves for these sort of shifts in the world? But it certainly appears, from the Western perspective at least, that we are moving into that more homogenized one world government type setup. So let's see how that goes. I personally don't like that. But I'm not in charge of the world, am I? I am, however, in charge of myself. So I will continue to do the things that benefit me, which are looking after myself, my family, my community, and trying to build in resilience and self-reliance as best as possible. All right. What else is happening? I mean, there's heaps of stuff that's happening, but I'm not going to talk about too much today. Last little thing that I'm going to touch on here is the media now has come out, and this is from Business Insider. They've finally come out and said, put out a warning that we're on the cusp of diesel rationing within the US. So if you think gas prices are bad, diesel is in its worst crisis. So gas, when they say gas in the US, they don't mean actual gas. They mean gasoline or petrol, as we would call it here in Australia. So what they're essentially saying, if you think that petrol prices are bad, diesel is in its worst crisis since the 1970s. And in the 1970s, there was two oil crises in the 70s that had huge effects on everything. In fact, it was post those crises that we kind of had the official formation of what we would call the petrodollar, which has been the dominant staple or form of reserve, the bedrock really of what our economic system has worked off since the 70s. So really for the past 45 to 50 years, this is what we've worked off, the US petrodollar, and that's how it got formed, was through these crises. So we're now in that spot again. We're now in the worst place we've been since then. There have been other little spikes. There have been things where prices have gone up and stuff like that, but we haven't been in a crisis like we've seen since the 1970s. So the markets are telling us there's a shortage. Again, I'll just try and do the layman's explanation of this, or the Stuart Dullard explanation, the way I see the world. It's not just as simple as going like, there's a shortage of this. We can see that. We can count it. The way markets work and move are slower and harder to read than you would actually imagine. It's not as simple as going, we've got X amount of gold, we've got X amount of wheat, we've got no internet. There we go. We've got no internet. We can't just look at things like that and go, we've done our inventory, we did a stock take, we can understand. It's actually a slower moving beast. And usually what we're seeing in the market is we're actually looking back in time. So what we're seeing was something 3 months ago. So we wait to get told by the market, and the market lags. So we're actually living in the past. What's happening here and now, right at the coalface, we can't actually see. Like, we can see it and we can surmise, but we can't actually see the statistical data on it. So the markets are telling us that there's a shortage. So if we're seeing a shortage in the markets, it's kind of like, well, it might be much worse right now. We don't know where we actually are right now in time, in space, as far as the market is concerned. This is a tailwind for inflation. We're demanding more diesel than anyone can supply right now. And I've talked about this a little bit in dribs and drabs, that the idea that the markets are working at scale. So the idea that we can apply the micro to the macro doesn't really bear out. We can't just go like, oh, we're not getting oil off Russia. That's okay. We can make it here. We can get shale oil in the US and Canada, and we can do it offshore in Australia, and we can pump it out of here, and we can maybe buy it off Venezuela or hit up Brazil or something. And they'll just ramp up like that and do it. It doesn't work like that. These systems take a long time to ramp up. Infrastructure actually has to be built up around it. Supply chains have to be built up around it. There is a big lag. It's a big, long ship, and it takes a long time to turn. I heard a cool saying of some YouTube video I was watching yesterday, and it said, kind of like a big ship like the Titanic or something, if you're cruising along at a certain speed and you see a iceberg ahead of you, then you've already hit it. It's too late to actually turn. So you see it, you're like, oh, there's an iceberg. Cool, we're about to hit it. And it might take a long time to hit it, but it wouldn't matter what you did at that point. You could like pull full right, you're still going to hit it. And that's kind of where we are in the market at the moment. We're like, shortages, shit, inflation. And everyone's like, whoa, cool, why doesn't the Fed do something about it? And the Fed's like, pulling the wheel to the left. We're going to smash into it anyway. There's not much we can do about that. So that's where we're heading. These indicators I'm always interested in looking at. And then I think about, extrapolate that out to my life. I'm like, cool, all right, diesel shortages, what can I do about that? Obviously, I've talked about this in the past. I personally store up some diesel. At my place, my mutual assistance group, we have a reservoir of diesel that we also use because our vehicles use diesel. So we have a little bit of fat in there. It's not anything that's going to last like a year or anything like that. But if we were to ration that out, we could probably get done what we need to get done within our vehicles, within the machinery that we need to operate and utilize if there was a shortage in Australia of diesel. And again, I reiterate this every time. Australia, we work off a slightly different system. Some of the things that happen in America, we will feel here in Australia. Some of them will be immediate. Some of them will be after effects, second and third order effects. But to a certain extent, we are insulated against this, but not totally. And again, I will say that Australia's strategic fuel reserve isn't in Australia. It's in the US. And if the US is hurting fuel, you can guarantee they'll ask nicely if they can take that off us. And we will say probably very politely, yes, absolutely you can. And smile as they point their guns at us. Hey, can we get that oil off you guys, by the way? Cool, awesome. I thought you'd say yes. No, they wouldn't threaten us, but like I think just the way it is, Australia would always prefer to give their oil up to someone like the US rather than say no and have them actually force the decision upon us. All right. So that's some of the things that I've seen today in the last 24 hours. So just a recap of what I was talking about here. Just ended up talking about gas and fuel and diesel in particular, which affects me because I use a diesel vehicle. But these are things that we need to start thinking about. As I said, shortages, I think, are coming. We are in the age of crisis at the moment. Again, that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just we need to properly prepare for that now that we understand what sort of world that we're in. Times will get tougher, but that is a moving target, I guess. Tougher for whom? For those who are prepared, maybe it won't be as tough. So that's why I do this sort of stuff and I talk about this sort of stuff, because I want people to prepare. And that way, when things do get tougher, but in the societal sense, that you and your family will be better off. And the more people we can encourage to do that, the better off the community will be. And the more communities that are better off, the more better off our society will be as a whole. That's my belief anyway. What else have I talked about today? Some stuff. Watch that space in Europe, what's going on there, and then mass shooting events in the US. So keep your eyes open as always. Doesn't necessarily need to be a shooter. It can be any old thing that's happening out in the world. I think you're just going to be a lot better, a lot safer if you keep your eyes open. If you're not walking around staring at your phone with your headphones in, then you're more likely to be able to see something developing before it develops. So keep your eyes open out there. Keep prepping. Keep storing up your stuff in whatever way that you find appropriate. And apart from that, if you've got any questions, please feel free to shoot them through to me. Always really happy to get your questions. But yeah, apart from that, that's it for today. So stay safe out there and Semper Paratus.